There are people whom nothing seems to touch, rudeness bounces off, criticism doesn't stick, and betrayal doesn't destroy them. They continue to live, they continue to work, they continue to love, and you look at them and wonder, what is wrong with them? Or what is wrong with me? I will tell you straight, such people are called psychologically resilient and emotionally mature, but the truth is, they aren't born that way. They simply know what you do not. 8 specific things, verified by neuroscience and decades of clinical practice. And today, I will tell you all 8. But first, one question. When was the last time someone else's word or silence knocked you off track for hours or even days? If you had to think about it then, you are already there, in that place from which we are escaping together today. By the end of this talk, you won't just have theory. You will have a working map of your own brain. You will understand why you are affected by things that shouldn't affect you. Where does this vulnerability come from, the one you hide so carefully? And most importantly, what exactly to do about it? Right now, we will break down 8 psychological secrets. Each one is a tool. Take them all, and you will become the person others look at and wonder, how do they do it? Stay until the end. The 8th secret is the most unexpected, and perhaps the most important of all. I have been working in neuroscience and psycholinguistics for several decades. And if there is one question I am asked most often, not at conferences or in interviews, but in real conversations when people stop pretending, it is this: why does this affect me so much? A colleague's word, a stranger's glance, a loved one, silence, an online comment, or an assessment you didn't ask for. And behind this question, there is always another, deeper one. Why doesn't it affect others? Why do some people live as if they have a protective layer, while others walk around with an open wound? The answer lies in the structure of the brain. But not only there, because the brain is plastic. I say this to you as a neuroscientist. Neuroplasticity is not a metaphor or a fancy word for motivational posters. It is a fact. Your brain changes depending on what you do with it every day. This means psychological invulnerability is not a personality trait, it is a skill. And a skill can be developed. But how exactly? I will start with something that makes many people angry at first. When someone else's words hurt you, you think you are reacting to that person, to their rudeness, their unfairness, or their stupidity. But neuroscience says otherwise. You are reacting to yourself, or more precisely to what is already living inside you, an old wound that this word accidentally touched, a belief you carry within, a fear you thought you had already moved past. Let me explain how this works at the brain level. When you hear something unpleasant, your amygdala reacts before you even have a chance to realize it in a split second. And it does not analyze what exactly was said. It looks for a match with past experience. Has this been said to you before? What does this resemble? Something that caused pain? In the past. There is a match and anxiety is activated. Where there is anxiety, there is a reaction. And here's what is important to understand. The intensity of your reaction is directly linked not to what the other person said, but to how deeply a corresponding belief about yourself sits within you. You are called incompetent, and you cannot sleep at night. This means that somewhere inside there is a fear of turning to be incompetent. You were ignored and you ruminate on it for hours. This means that somewhere inside lives a belief that you are not important enough. A person who is not hurt by this has a different internal map, not because they feel less, but because they do not have that unresolved issue. Mihai Labkovский talks about this differently, but he is talking about the same thing. A healthy person doesn't take offense, because being offended requires agreeing with what is being said about you. If you don't agree, the words simply have nothing to hook onto, which means the first step is not learning to ignore others. It is to find within yourself what makes their words rise up and deal with that. What exactly is this belief? Where did it come from? Who was the first person to tell you this about yourself? That is where the real work begins. And that is only the first secret, because it goes deeper. There is something most people don't know about their own brain. You do not make the decisions. Your nervous system makes them for you about half a second before you even realize that anything is happening at all. This is not a metaphor. It is neurobiology. Back in the 1980s, Benjamin Libet showed in his experiments the brain starts preparing a reaction before consciousness can form an intention. Half a second is a long time. During this time, your body has already tensed up, your heart has already sped up, your voice has already changed, and only then do you think about what is happening. This is called an automatic reaction, and it is exactly what makes you vulnerable. You don't decide to be offended, you've already been offended. You don't decide to be angry, the anger is already in your body. You only find an explanation for it later, wondering what to do about it. Here, I will tell you about what is called, in neuroscience, the space between stimulus and response. Viktor Frankl, having survived the camp, wrote about this differently, but more accurately. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies your freedom. In practice, it looks like this. You are being provoked. You feel that you are about to say or do something you will later regret. Right here, take a physical pause. Inhale through the nose for 4 counts. Hold. Exhale for 8. This isn't meditation for the sake of meditation. It is autonomic nervous system regulation. The vagus nerve activates during a slow exhale, and the parasympathetic system begins to override the sympathetic one. Anxiety drops, cortisol levels fall, and you gain that very space where you can choose your reaction for seconds. Sometimes that is enough to avoid destroying what took years to build. But here's what is important. This only works if you regularly practice this pause during calm situations. When the storm has already begun, it is too late to learn. The space is built in advance. So the second secret isn't emotional control, it's training the pause before you need it. Because without the pause, you react on autopilot, and autopilot is programmed by old experiences. And here, what are we approaching? Something almost no one talks about out loud. Let me tell you about a patient. I will call her Natasha. A smart woman, successful, accomplished. She came to me with one problem. A colleague at work once said her ideas were uninteresting, one word, and she couldn't get it out of her head for 3 months. I asked her, "What do you know about this person? About his life, his fears, his history?" She went silent. That is the point. When a person says something hurtful, they are speaking primarily about themselves, their limitations, their pain, and their value system, which was formed long before they met you. This is called projection, and it is one of the most powerful psychological mechanisms that constantly operates within us and which we almost never notice. A person who criticizes your appearance is unhappy with their own. A person who says you are not smart enough lives with a chronic fear of their own incompetence. A person who belittles is looking for a way to feel superior, if only for a second. This does not mean their words are the truth. It means their words are a map of their inner world, and you are not obligated to live by their map. Neurobiologically, here is what happens. When you accept someone else's assessment as truth, your mirror neurons literally embed it into your neural network. You begin to see yourself through their eyes, and it takes hold. But that same neuroplasticity works in the other direction. Each time you consciously reject someone else's projection and replace it with your own assessment, you reprogram that network. Natasha eventually arrived at a simple conclusion. A colleague said her ideas weren't interesting, but her ideas had already been accepted, by 3 other people that same month. So the problem wasn't the ideas. The problem was that she let one voice drown out all the others. Secret number 3. Another person's opinion is information about them, not about you. You have the right to examine it, but you are not obligated to live in it. Although here's what's interesting. There are situations where we aren't stung by what someone else says, but by what our own inner voice says. And it can be much harsher than any outside critic. I want to ask you a question and ask you to answer honestly. How do you talk to yourself when you make a mistake? If your best friend heard what you say to yourself in those moments, what would they think? For most people, the internal dialogue in moments of failure is cruel. You're an idiot. You screwed up again. Who even gave you permission? And here's the paradox. We allow ourselves to speak to ourselves in a way we would never let someone else speak to us. This inner critic is not you. It is the internalized voices of parents, teachers, and significant people from the past who once said something similar. The brain recorded this as a survival manual. If I criticize myself first, then someone else's criticism won't catch me by surprise. The logic is there, but the price is huge because a chronic inner critic keeps you in a constant state of anxiety and shame. And shame is the most destructive of all social emotions. It says it's not that I did something bad, but that I am bad myself. And in such a state, any external word falls on already inflamed ground. Brené Brown, who has researched shame for 2 decades, came to a conclusion that I share completely. Shame thrives in secrecy and silence. The only thing that destroys it is self-compassion, not pity, not indulgence. It is compassion, that same willingness to understand and support that you show to someone you love. Kristen Neff, a professor at the University of Texas, showed in her research that people who practice self-compassion are more resilient, recover faster from failures, and fall into depression less often. It is not that they think better of themselves. It is that they treat themselves like a human being. Try this. The next time the inner critic speaks, ask yourself whose voice that belongs to. Is it truly my voice or someone else's that I internalized long ago? And then say to yourself what you would say to a friend. Not everything is fine, but honest. Warmth. Yes, that was hard. Yes, I made a mistake. And it is normal to make mistakes. Secret number 4. Your inner critic isn't the truth about you. It's an old program, and programs can be rewritten. But here is what's curious. Even when you deal with your inner critic, there is something else, something we almost never talk about openly, something that makes us truly invulnerable or truly defenseless. And it's connected to what you think about your boundaries. There is a common misconception about psychological boundaries. People think a boundary is when you close yourself off, when you say no and walk away, when you become inaccessible. But a real boundary works differently. A boundary is not between you and another person. It is clarity within yourself about what is acceptable to you and what is not. It is knowing your own address, where you are from and where you will not go. A person without boundaries is a person without an address. They let other people decide where they live. And then every word, every gesture, every mood of someone else moves them around. That is why it is so easy to hurt them. Labkovский speaks about this directly. A neurotic lives someone else's life. They are constantly watching what people will think, what they will say, how they will judge. There is practically no self of their own. There is only a reflection of others' expectations. Neurobiologically, here is what happens. When a person lacks a stable sense of self, The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for self-control, decision-making, and a sense of identity, works in overload mode, constantly scanning the environment. Kami, am I safe? Am I accepted? Am I doing the right thing? And this work consumes massive resources that are then missing for everything else. When a boundary exists, this work simplifies. The brain knows that external judgment is just data, not a verdict. Data can be examined and one can decide whether to accept it or not, how to set boundaries in practice. Start with one thing. Choose one situation where you regularly do something against your will. Not because you want to, but because you can't refuse. And next time say no. Just no. Without 3 pages of explanation, without apologies, well, you understand it would be inconvenient. The first few times are very uncomfortable because the brain is used to a different pattern, but every no said from your center strengthens the neural connection between your sense of self and your behavior. And gradually this becomes your norm. The 5th secret, the one who is invulnerable is not the one who lets no one in. The one who is invulnerable is the one who knows where they end and doesn't apologize for it. But there is something that destroys even the strongest boundaries, something subtle, almost invisible, and it lives in how you interpret what is happening around you. Here's a scenario. A colleague walked by and didn't say hello. What happened? One person didn't greet another. That is all that literally happens. But what happens next in your head? He's angry with me. I did something wrong. He doesn't like me. He told others and now everyone thinks so. I'm going to be fired soon. In 30 seconds, a single neutral event has grown into a story with several acts, main characters, and a tragic ending. And now the person is suffering. Truly suffering. Their heart is pounding. Their thoughts won't settle, the day is ruined, while the colleague was probably just thinking about his toothache. Cognitive psychology calls these cognitive distortions. The brain doesn't perceive reality directly, it interprets it. And these interpretations are often mistaken, especially when the brain is tired, stressed, or has relevant past experience. Aaron Beck, one of the founders of cognitive behavioral therapy, identified some of the most common distortions. Catastrophizing. This is terrible. This is the end? Mind reading. I know what he's thinking about me. Here. Personalization. It's definitely my fault. Filtering. Seeing only the bad, ignoring everything else. Recognize yourself? The good news. The brain can be trained to notice these stories before they completely capture your attention. This is called cognitive distancing. You look at the story and see that it is just a story. You are its author, which means you can rewrite it. A simple way. When you catch yourself interpreting, ask what other explanations are possible. Not just one. 3, 5, 10. The colleague didn't say hello. Maybe he's having a bad day. Maybe he didn't notice. Maybe he has problems at home. Maybe he has a headache. The more explanations you can come up with, the less power the first automatic one has. And gradually, the brain stops perceiving the catastrophic interpretation as the only one possible. The 6th secret, an event is just an event. Suffering begins where the story begins, and you have the right to write a different one. But here is what's important. Rewriting the story is work. It's not just think positive. It's an honest question. What do I know for sure? And what did I make up? And here we approach what I think is one of the most powerful and underrated secrets. It's not about what you think, but how you live in your body. There is a thing we often forget when we talk about psychological resilience. The brain is not a separate thing. The brain lives in The body constantly sends the brain signals that the brain accepts as information about reality. You slouch, the brain gets a threat signal, a defensive posture. You breathe shallowly, the brain gets an anxiety signal. You don't move for hours, your brain gets a signal of stagnation, of being stuck. This also works in reverse. Amy Cuddy's research from Harvard showed that just 2 minutes in a power pose, head held high, shoulders back, straight spine, lowers cortisol levels and increases testosterone levels. The body changes chemistry. Chemistry changes state. State changes reaction. This doesn't mean you need to walk around in a specific pose for the rest of your life. It means the body is a tool and you can work with it. Chronic tension in the body, shoulders, neck, stomach is a physical trace of anxiety, of past anxiety. Often, the ancient brain keeps the body in a state of danger readiness, even when there is no danger, because it was once there. And here is what makes this especially important in the context of our conversation. When the body is chronically tense, the amygdala runs at high revs. It sees threats where there are none, hears aggression where there isn't any, and feels rejection where there is just indifference. Physical regulation is not an alternative to psychological work, it is its foundation. What should you do? Practically any movement, any regular movement, lowers cortisol levels. Sleep, and I say this very seriously, 7-8 hours, is a prerequisite for the normal functioning of the prefrontal cortex. Without it, it literally shuts down and the amygdala takes over. Touch, physical contact with loved ones produces oxytocin, which directly reduces anxiety. This is biology, not esoterics. And here's one more thing. Breathing is the only function of the autonomic nervous system that you can control consciously. Everything else, heartbeat, digestion, blood pressure happens without your input, but your breath is yours. And through breathing, you get direct access to your nervous system. This is not mysticism. It is anatomy. The seventh secret. Resilience does not start in the head. It starts in the body. Take care of your body, and the brain will follow. But here's what we saved for last. The eighth secret, the one I promised. And it is the strangest one, because it's not about how to protect yourself from the world, but about how to change your overall attitude toward pain. I have seen people who endured loss, illness, and the destruction of what they had built for years. And they didn't stop feeling pain, but something in them changed. They didn't become colder. They became, how should I put it, more spacious. Inside, a space appeared where pain could exist without destroying everything else. This is psychological resilience at its deepest level. Not armor, not distance, not indifference, but the ability to hold pain while remaining yourself. Oh, post-traumatic growth is not a fantasy. It is a well-documented phenomenon. Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, researchers from the University of North Carolina, described it in the 1990s. Yes, people who have survived difficult experiences often speak of profound positive changes in themselves, their values, relationships, and their perception of life. They do not say that they are happy about what happened. They say they have become different and often understand better what is truly important. This does not happen by itself. It is the result of not avoiding the pain, but living through it. This is where most people make a mistake when they are in pain. The first impulse is to make the pain stop, to get distracted, fill your time, convince yourself that everything is fine. That is understandable. It is an instinct, but pain that is avoided does not go away. It goes deep inside and then resurfaces for any reason precisely because it was never lived through. Truly, living through it does not mean suffering endlessly. It means allowing yourself to feel what is there, naming it, giving it space, and then not holding on to it. Buddhist thought coincides here with neuroscience. Suffering is amplified by resistance. When you fight against what already is, you waste a huge amount of resources battling reality. When you realize what is there, not agreeing, not approving, but acknowledging, resources are freed up. And then there is room for something else. Labkovский says, a happy person is not one who has no problems. It is someone who knows how to deal with them. I would add, and who has stopped wasting energy pretending that there are no problems. The eighth secret, invulnerability, is not when nothing ever affects you. It is when you are affected, you know it. You feel it, you live through it. And you remain. You're not destroyed. You do not vanish. You remain yourself. And that is the whole difference. Let's look at all of this together now. Because these 8 things are not 8 separate tools, they're a system. And it works precisely as a system. First, you respond to yourself, which means working with pain begins within, not outside. Second, your nervous system is faster than you, so you need to learn to pause before you actually need to. Third, the opinion of another is their projection. This means someone else's word is not a definition of you, provided you know yourself. Fourth, your inner critic is not you, which means self-compassion. It is not weakness. It is a condition for resilience. Fifth, boundaries are clarity from within. This means invulnerability is built not on detachment, but on self-knowledge. Sixth, you suffer from the story, not the events. This means the question, what do I know for sure? Changes everything. Seventh, the body stores everything. This means the nervous system through the body is not an addition to the work, it is its foundation. Eighth, invulnerability isn't the absence of pain, but a different attitude toward it. The goal is not to become unfeeling, but to become expansive. None of these secrets work on their own, but together. They create what I call the cycle resilience of an adult. Not suppression, not distance, not a mask. A living, warm, conscious resilience. And here's what I want to tell you in closing, because it's more important than all the theory. When people say, I want nothing to hurt me, they usually don't actually mean that. They want the pain from specific things to stop, from loneliness, from the feeling of not being seen, from the fear of not being enough. That is different, and it is more important. Because to become a person whom nothing hurts is to become less alive. Sensitivity is not a weakness, it is a resource. It is what allows you to see beauty where others do not. To love deeper than others love. To understand people with a precision that those who have armored themselves lack. The goal is not to remove sensitivity. The goal is to remove the chaotic reaction, the gap between the stimulus and the storm. I have studied the brain for many years, and the more I study it, the more convinced I am. The most amazing thing is its ability to change at any age. After any experience, neuroplasticity doesn't end at 25. That means it's never too late, never too much endured, and your reactions are never too fixed to start changing them. This is what I want you to take from this conversation. Not 8 points to memorize, but one feeling. The feeling that you are not a victim of your reactions. You are their author. Perhaps not a very experienced author yet, but an author nonetheless, and that changes everything. Let me share something personal. I deal with these issues not just as a scientist. I deal with them because I myself went through periods when many things hurt me, when someone else's word could ruin my day, when I replayed conversations over and over, trying to understand exactly where I went wrong. And here's what changed the situation. Not a specific technique, not a specific exercise, but the decision to treat my reactions with curiosity rather than shame. To stop asking what is wrong with me and start asking what this tells me about myself. It sounds simple. It is not simple. It is work. Slow, honest, frequent, uncomfortable work. But it changes the quality of life dramatically. Not because the world becomes kinder, but because you stop waiting for the world to become kinder in order to feel good. And the people I have worked with who have walked this path describe similar feelings. Something inside becomes quieter, more stable. Not because you feel less, but because you know more about who you are. That is exactly what these 8 secrets lead to. Let me tell you one last thing. True psychological resilience is not a privilege of certain people. It is not a trait you are born with. It is the result of concrete, daily, sometimes uncomfortable work. Every time you notice an automatic reaction and pause, instead of acting autopilot, you build this resilience. Every time you ask if it is a fact or a story, instead of believing the first interpretation, you build this resilience. Every time you say to yourself what you would say to a friend, instead of beating yourself up with an inner critic, you build this resilience. It accumulates slowly, but irreversibly. The brain is always changing. The only question is, in what direction are you changing it? If this conversation was useful to you, let me know in the comments. Not because I need compliments, but because when you articulate what exactly resonated with you, that is the beginning of the work. You are already starting to build a connection between understanding and your own experience, and share this conversation with someone who needs it. You know such people. Each of us has someone nearby who is affected by too much, too strongly, and for too long. We will continue this conversation because one can talk about the brain for a very long time, and it is always worth it.